Greetings. This is the commentary and sermonette on the song, You Won't Stumble. The date I had on this is February 27th, 1983, new. So when I was completing a lot of partial songs, this was one that I just came up with during that time period as well. It's now August 21st, 2023, so this song is over 40 years old. So let's get right on into the lyrics. Most of this is from the book of Proverbs. Much of it is Solomon's writings, and many times it's constructed as a father giving instructions to a son. Sometimes it's wisdom speaking. In my view, anything that's correct or true, actually God would be the one behind it. So when he talks about a father talking to a son, I think we can spiritualize this as God, our Father, speaking to us as his son or daughter. So that's why in the lyrics when it says, "Hear my son and accept my sayings," I have a capital M on that. Having said that, let's go ahead and go right on into this. Hear my son and accept my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I've directed you into the way of wisdom. That's God. I have led you into upright paths. When you walk, your steps won't be impeded, and if you run, you will not stumble. No, you won't stumble. No, you won't stumble. Following this first verse, I break into a chorus and I say, Jesus, I thank you for teaching me great and mighty things I didn't know. Now that comes from Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah while he was still confined in the court of the guard, saying, Thus saith the Lord who made the earth, the Lord who formed it to establish it. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you or teach you great and mighty things which you did not know. You can aggressively go after the things of life in our behavior, our speech, our priorities, our plans, and even if we run, we're not going to stumble. And I'm thanking the Lord at this point that he's given me the opportunity to climb up on that path, because I was off of it and down in a sea of death. And when he calls us to him, it's as though we're able to climb out of that and get on the highway that leads to the city of the great King, where he cleans us up and he begins to teach us how to walk in his ways and not in our ways that we had walked in previously that did nothing but bring chaos and confusion and death. Now the second verse says, My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them from your sight depart, but keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and health to all their whole body. But passion is rottenness to the bones, but passion is rottenness to your bones. That last part comes from Proverbs 14:30. The rest of that Proverbs 4 passage is, Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious lips far from you. You speak truth to one another. Let your eyes look directly ahead. Let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. He's basically saying, come after me. Focus on me. Listen to me. While I am fully persuaded that initial salvation is an act of God, Jesus said, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. I think I could show you on almost every page of the New Testament some indicator of God being the one behind salvation. But here's probably one of the most clear ones. Paul was writing to the Romans, and he's using an Old Testament quote. As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. There's not one. They have all turned aside. Together they have become useless. There's none who does good. There's not even one. But at the end of this, it says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. Now that's what I want to focus on for a moment here. In the very beginning of the Proverbs, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Another place says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The beginning, the starting place for the knowledge of God, the starting place for the wisdom of God. Both of these, they start with the fear of the Lord. I asked my youngest daughter yesterday, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? And she said, wisdom. I said, yes. There's another place, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? And she said, faith? And I said, well, knowledge. But in truth, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of faith. God's definition of faith, biblical faith, saving faith, is this. It is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The assurance of things hoped for, information of what we're hoping for, the conviction of things not seen. Okay, what we are told about, heaven to come, judgment to come, resurrection from the dead, conviction of things not seen. We don't yet see that. It's all based on knowledge. So faith is based upon the knowledge of God. But also when Paul was talking to the Corinthians, he says, for we preach Christ crucified. To Jews it's a stumbling block or a scandal. Messiah crucified? What a joke. And to Gentiles it's foolishness. God becoming a man to go to a cross? What are you talking about? But to those who are the called, there it is right there, the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of wisdom. It's actually the beginning of faith, because faith involves knowledge from God and wisdom from God, where we embrace these things. So Claire was actually right, and more right than I even realized at the time. Now, the thing about initial salvation, while that is an act of God reaching down to bring us to himself, and Apostle Paul, when he was Saul, he was not looking for the Lord whenever he was on the way to Damascus. He said he's set apart from his mother's womb, and at the appropriate time God called him out of his insanity. But once we become a Christian and we have this opportunity to get up on this highway where he's pulled us out of this death and transferred us into the kingdom of the beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of our sins, once he transfers us and puts us on that highway, that's where our free will really comes into play. We can either apply ourselves to the means of grace, which means seeking after God in all matters, big or small, or we can wiggle around and continue to avoid him and not pursue him as we should. Well, this is where the fear of the Lord, I think, is extremely important. I've many times said that if I will not cooperate with you, obey you, because of love for you, then help me to be afraid, to fear you of what you might do, of what might happen if I don't get in line, because he says that judgment has begun with the household of God. What's the fate then of the godless man and the sinner? See, as a Christian, we become his son or his daughter, and just as you won't allow your own children to get away with certain things, he is going to discipline us. Now, if they're not your children, that's not your responsibility, in that you are not going to be disciplining them. Perfect love does cast out all fear, and that's the goal. And maybe in some areas you've achieved it, maybe in some areas I've achieved it. But there may be other areas where we are not in cooperation with him, and if I am not going to obey him or cooperate because I appreciate what he's done for me and love him, then I've asked him that the fear of God would restrain my madness, put it that way. So I want to read a little something that I wrote about the fear of the Lord. You cannot be in the place of love for him without fear of him somewhere at the base of now operating in love. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge. So it's a base somewhere in there. This applies to all areas of our human functioning and behaviors. Where there's no fear of him first, then because of our natural sin state plus Satan's knowledge and exploitation of that, we will, at a minimum, walk in that area in the natural vanity of our own thinking. Love for God equals obeying God, and it's obeying according to knowledge. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And the goal is to create habits where our senses are trained to discern good from evil. So where the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge and it's the beginning of wisdom, that's just the beginning. And as we cooperate with him and begin to experience the correctness of his positions in all areas, great and small, we will more readily say yes to Him where we're actually growing in righteousness. The problem is if we begin to neglect, like in this song, accept my sayings, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them from your sight depart, but keep them in the midst of your heart. That is active, ongoing activity on our part, which we can choose not to do. And the danger is you can grow in an area or areas, and if you begin to leave off of those disciplines and not watch over your heart with all diligence and not have them in the midst of your heart, we don't just stay at that plateau or that level we've attained, we begin to degenerate. It's like losing muscle tone when you quit working out. You lose your edge. I believe this is what happened to King David. The very things that got him to the place where God was with him and he did a lot of tremendous things. When he became king, then he wound up leaving off the fear of the Lord and the practices that got him there, and he wound up doing this horrific thing with Uriah the Hittite and with Bathsheba. I think it also happened to Solomon, same thing. He asked God to give him wisdom in how to faithfully and accurately deal with God's people. And God said, you could ask for anything, but since you didn't ask for long life and all the rest of it, I'm going to give you all that wealth, all the rest of it, because you've asked for the right thing. Solomon started right, but boy, he got way off. And I think you can see there's probably a lot of Christians that get to a certain point and success maybe enters in or opportunities come, and the very activities that got them to that place, they quit doing the things that got them to the point where God could open up doors for them. Again, with Claire yesterday as we were driving, she was talking to me about how she's having a hard time being consistent in the Word because she doesn't want to rush it so that she's checked off what she should do. But she wants to spend time and concentrate there. But then life is pushing her so hard, then she winds up not doing it. And I said to her, well, I understand that, Claire, because we know that when we open up the Bible or to get into this, there's a real good chance that we might be challenged in some area because God said His thoughts are not our thoughts, His ways are not our ways. Just as the heavens higher than the earth, so is His thoughts than our thoughts, knowledge, and His ways than our ways, applying that knowledge and walking in wisdom. So that's why we instinctively know it's going to take effort and time to be in His Word if we're going to really interact with it properly, and we may indeed wind up being challenged, which who likes that? So we have a tendency to want to avoid that many times. But we can also sense, though, and she agreed with this, that if we don't engage with Him in His Word, we can sense ourselves just shriveling up inside. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I can tell when I'm not having enough time in the Bible. It's like your spirit gets soured. I don't know how else to state it. And that's where then it's like, God, help me to discipline myself, to expose myself to your Word, to humble myself before you and ask you to teach me great and mighty things I don't know. So, since the fear of the Lord is the beginning or the base of knowledge and the beginning and the base of wisdom, if at any point along the way we abandon that, the knowledge fades and the wisdom evaporates. Listen to this. Paul said to the Ephesians that in reference to your former manner of life, in other words, your pre-Christian days, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. Being corrupted. I think it's telling us, present tense, that our old man is getting worse and we have to lay him aside. It's like with age, you don't just stand still, you're going in a direction. Well, our old nature doesn't just stand still once we get saved. It still wants to go in this direction that's negative and become more shrewd in its sin patterns, you might say. And that's why he says we put aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. These deceitful lusts. Deceit just means hidden. It's not obvious. It's trying to sneak in on you, these lusts. And we got to really watch out for old man, because I think it's getting more shrewd in how it can hide itself and deceive us. So if we're beginning to avoid God, Satan sees these cracks and he feeds that progression. Getting back to the song, in the chorus, I repeat, Jesus, I thank you for teaching me great and mighty things that I didn't know. Then I say, Jesus, I love you. Thank you for teaching me such great and mighty things. As Paul was ending his letter to the Corinthians, and he was sending greetings to them, but then he says this, if anyone does not love the Lord, he must be anathema, cursed. Maranatha, Lord, come. The word for love there is phileo. If anybody's ever told you that phileo means man's love, and it's a lesser form of love, that is complete error. And I would like for you to get my ebook on love in the Bible. If you think love is an important subject matter for Christianity, I would ask you to read it. I was taught that agape was the unconditional divine love of God, and the other word for love, phileo, was the lesser form of love, like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, is man's love. And that eros was the other Greek word, and it's not in the New Testament, that's sexual love. That's probably the only one they got right. As I first learned that agape cannot mean the unconditional divine love of God, look at John 3:19. I also then questioned about the word phileo. Had I been taught error about that? Well, there's one place that says that the Father loves the Son. It's the word phileo. So the Father has man's love for the Son. Obviously, that's not correct. As I dug into this word, it means cherish. Now, God does command that we love Him. And I always wondered, how do you command that we love you? That is the word agapeo. You can command agapeo, but phileo, it's the word for cherishing. And we're never commanded to cherish God. In the noun form, philos, it means a kiss or a friend, or phileo can mean to kiss, the verb, or to cherish. This is saying here, in just almost a throwaway line, if anyone does not phileo, cherish the Lord, he must be cursed. He must be damned. Maranatha, that's an Aramaic phrase, which means Lord, come, or our Lord, come. They think that that was well known in those circles, and it's a call for judgment, because when the Lord comes, this is after Jesus had come as the Lamb of God, now it's, oh Lord, come, it's come to judge. And I've never heard anybody preach on this. I'm going to have to do a more complete message on this phileo. If anyone does not cherish the Lord, he must be damned. Lord, come. Well, how do you go about cherishing someone? You got to know them. Now, I will say that my oldest daughter, and my youngest as well, but the first time they were put into my hands, it was an immediate cherishing. That's the warmth of love. I didn't have to try to create that or anything else. It was just there immediately. But most of the time, to cherish someone, it takes time. You've got to get to know them. And where agape comes in, if you look at 1 Corinthians 13, you don't even need to know the Greek. Agape is patient, kind, does not brag, is not arrogant, does not seek its own, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. It is all acts of our will, where it is all really directed at us rebuking ourselves and allowing people, in this case, elbow room to be who they are, because we might find we're rejecting them because we don't like the way their hair flips up, or we don't like the way they laugh, or we don't like the way they walk, or they get a little too close, or whatever that might be. All these things we have where we start pushing people away. It's like, do I have the authority from God to reject that person based on this thing? And we got to see what we're thinking, and we start rebuking ourselves. That's why we can do this towards enemies. And we are commanded to do that. These are acts of the will. But phileo is a totally different thing. This is the warmth of love. Maybe when you first got saved, you saw him clearly in all of his glory, and there was immediate cherishing. And probably to some degree that would be true. We're so thankful. when we know it's Him that's taken us out of these terrible situations we might have been in. But then we need to come to know Him and learn about Him. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you shall find rest for your souls. But learn from me, learn of me. So we need to learn who the Jesus of the Bible is, not the Jesus of our own imagination. And if He will grant us that kind of insight and knowledge to see Him for who He is, a genuine cherishing can grow for the Jesus of the Bible. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a church service, and I went up into not the balcony area, but it goes up from the main floor. I wanted to get away from the volume that was there, and I found myself surrounded by these big guys, and I was so impressed that they were all there. And there was one song that was, I just really prayed for these guys. Well, it turns out I was surrounded by the Western Kentucky football team. They were all there as a group because the head coach goes to that church. And I had some great conversations with some of these guys, just tremendously respectful young people. But there was one young fella in front of me, and I think he was mocking people that were raising their hands down below. I may have been wrong, but I was pretty sure he was mocking some of that, the way he was talking to the guy next to him. And I caught him outside, and I talked to him about one thing just for 1 second. I only had a second. But if I get a chance to talk to him again, what I wanted to tell him was that this Jesus who we are here about, I believe was the toughest human that's ever been on the face of this globe. Not the strongest in terms of weightlifting, but the toughest. Part of my cherishing of Christ is that I do believe that His physical body was at the pinnacle of being in the greatest shape of anybody that's ever been on the planet. He'd been walking for 3+ years all over the countryside with these disciples, and Satan was given access to him right at that peak. And it took the maximum amount of pressure to extinguish the life that was in that physical body. Satan was prohibited from breaking any of the bones, but everything else. Jesus was unrecognizable by the time He was on that cross. His beard had been torn out. The scourging, there was no limit on the number of scourges by Romans you could get. The Jews would do 39 lashes instead of the 40th in case they'd miscounted. He never sinned in any of these things. And Pilate was amazed at Jesus enduring this. Satan was given that kind of opportunity on that kind of body, and the goal was to get Jesus to sin. If that is indeed true, which I do believe is correct, you talk about a cherishing that can grow out of those grounds, that He would allow that to happen to Him, and that's what was required for my sins to be forgiven and pardoned. And when it says the Father was pleased to crush Him, putting Him to grief, we have no idea what it means that God the Father crushed Him. There is no way we can even comprehend what I believe to be a massive understatement of the reality of what Jesus went through in order to create the platform for my sins to be addressed and expunged. You start getting a hold of some of this, it causes a cherishing as you see Him for who He is and what He's done for us. And one of the beauties of this, again, Claire, my daughter, yesterday, had a great time with her. She's 27, and we were discussing some things. And one thing I said to her, if the Father has given His Son to die for us in this way, why would He withhold wisdom from us or request from us that we may need in order to serve Him here and now in righteousness, peace, and in joy? First of all, you need to be cooperating with Him. That's the righteousness. If we're not in peace or in joy, if we're not experiencing those things in whatever situation we're in, then why would He withhold the necessary information we need in order to be in that place of serving Him in righteousness, peace, and joy? He won't withhold it. He won't. He wants to give it to us. He's already given us His Son. So that can give us great encouragement to come after Him. So, getting back to the song, let's finish up. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Constant activity on our part. Do not let them from your sight depart, but keep them in the midst of your heart. That's effort on an event by event basis, not just daily, constantly. We need to keep His things in front of us. So if we do that, when you walk, your steps won't be impeded. If we're walking in the light, we're not going to trip over anything. Doesn't mean there won't be obstacles, but we're not going to stumble over it. And if you run, you won't stumble. No, you won't stumble, you won't stumble. And then I finish up, and I wish I had a chorus as big as the world. Jesus, we thank you for teaching us great and mighty things we didn't know. Jesus, we love you. Thank you for teaching us such great and mighty things. And then I finished it. I wanted to go back to Jesus. We thank you for teaching us great and mighty things we didn't know. That's who He is. He is the teacher. God Almighty, I thank you that you're the teacher. He is a great teacher. He is a teacher of life. He is a teacher of freedom. He's a teacher of peace. He is the teacher of all teachers. Listen, and you're going to learn great and mighty things you have not known. And when you learn these matters, it always leads to life, and you will indeed live.